Okay, Zach, I'm going to fly through this stuff, and my apologies. I spent 2 or 3 weeks doing this with students back in the month of January or February. They had lots of questions. This is a topic which I think public schools do very well with the mechanics, but not the morality, and Catholic schools do a lot on the morality, but not the mechanics. So the first test is on Catholic sexual morality. 100 questions, where things are, what they do, what's a prostate, what's the fallopian tubes, identify them on a diagram, and be able to identify what they do. Multiple choice test, all Scantron. Big TION words, a lot of true-false questions, a whole section on birth control, questions on sex, gender, and orientation. So I'm going to talk fast, and you can pause this and write down things as you need to. Okay, excuse that. Let's do this in password. In the gender issues assignment, you should have gotten into the difference between sex and gender identity and sexual orientation and gender roles. If you have questions about any of those, let me know. Long and short of it, gender roles are the only things that don't seem to be inborn. Our society says girls are supposed to like pink. There's nothing biological about it. It seems that one's gender identity, what one identifies oneself as, one's sexual orientation, are things that seem to be biosocial. They seem to have an inborn nature to them, may be triggered by things in society. Sex, what genitalia one is born with, is obviously something that is not chosen. Again, email me if you have any questions on any of these terms. You should be able to identify what all these things do, and on the diagrams, be able to identify where they are. A lot of TION words. I believe I talked about ovulation and menstruation, conception, contraception, masturbation, erection, ejaculation, sterilization, abortion, objectification. That's the Reviving Ophelia section. If you have questions about what any of those words mean, let me know, and I will email back to you. There are 5 different types of contraception, and contraception is what tries to prevent conception from happening. Abortifacients are things that happen after conception, so they're not contraception. They're birth control, but they're not contraception. Conception's taking place. We've got all the chromosomes to make a real human being, and so abortifacients is anything that happens after conception. Direct sterilization is when somebody has a surgical procedure, whether it's tubal ligation or vasectomy, where the intention is to avoid having children. Indirect sterilization is when somebody has some sort of surgery to address some sort of physical problem. It could be prostate cancer, it could be ovarian cysts, and the person is sterile because of that. And in Catholic teaching, having surgery that leads to indirect sterilization is morally permissible, whereas having a vasectomy because you don't want to have kids anymore, or having a hysterectomy because you don't want to get pregnant, is considered against Catholic teaching. And I'll talk about that again later. Natural family planning is the one most supported by the Catholic Church because it works with the body's natural processes. On the test, they are A, B, C, D, and E on the Scantron. And I think I have about 8, 9, 10 things where you have to identify what kind of what they are. On the test, an IUD will be listed as an abortifacient. There is some research, and we had a day-long discussion about this, and I looked at things online. IUDs can potentially prevent conception from happening, but by its nature, an artificial object in the uterus causes a spontaneous abortion, or causes an abortion to take place. It keeps the fertilized zygote from implanting. So on the test, IUD is listed as an abortifacient, and there are some types of emergency birth control which might act as contraception. And so on the test, I think I put RU486, which is clearly an abortifacient medicine. It's something a woman takes when she knows she's pregnant, and it keeps the zygote from implanting or causes it to be rejected. TIO inwards, not sure why I have this twice. Okay, I want to talk about the church and moral teaching. Moses never said anything about gamete intrafallopian transfer. Jesus never addressed the issue of using CRISPR to genetically modify babies. There's nothing in the book of Leviticus about capitalist versus socialist economic systems. So the Bible is our basis for all moral decisions as Catholics, but it's not very specific. Jesus said we should love our neighbor. God said we should love others. But the Bible isn't something that's cited with most modern moral issues. Instead, what we depend on are what are called magisterial teachings from the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. The most authoritative type of magisterial teaching, not sure why it's not on my list, would be a council document. Every 100 years or 300 years, the bishops of the Catholic Church get together and decide on teachings. And when all the bishops together decide on those council documents are kind of the most solemn of all of the magisterial teachings. More frequent than that are what are known as papal encyclical letters, where a pope writes a letter about war, or writes a letter about birth control, or writes a letter about some other issue, labor, capital, things like that. And those might come out every 10 years or so. And the Pope, since he's the head of all the bishops, writes on behalf of all of them, and so it's kind of the next layer of magisterial teaching. A group of bishops could write a pastoral letter about a moral issue. The bishops of the Northwest of the United States and Canada wrote one about the Columbia River. There was a bishop in Canada who wrote one about gambling. So a bishop or a group of bishops could write about a moral topic, and that carries less authority than a papal encyclical because it's a bishop or group of bishops addressing something more local, and but they still might carry weight with other bishops as well, even though it might have been written by bishops in South America. Bishops in the United States might say, hey, here's some trade policies that we're doing that aren't right. All of those Catholic teachings get summarized and organized into the Catechism, and the Catechism gets revised from time to time to include new Catholic teachings. So again, these are sources of Catholic teaching, and the whole idea behind the bishop's teaching is that Jesus handed his authority down to his apostles, with Peter as their head. Those apostles in turn passed their authority down to the bishops, with a pope as their head, and that the bishops, in communion with the pope in the Catholic Church, are what constitute the magisterium. And this idea that the bishops of today and the popes of today teach with the authority given to Jesus is the idea of apostolic succession. So, when I met with you, I talked to you about natural law. And when you read teachings of the Catholic Church on whatever issue, whether it's sexuality or economics or end-of-life care, this idea that the nature of things tells us what they are, that God says it's wrong to treat squirrels as though they're inanimate objects because they have feelings. God's built that into the system. Humans, by their nature, are different than animals. You can't treat a fetus just as though it's some sort of animal that you're killing because it's a pest. You shouldn't throw potatoes into a lake because you're wasting food. A potato is not a rock. So, again, the Bible doesn't have teachings on complex moral issues of today, and so a lot of magisterial teachings make use of natural law. And you watched a pretty good video on that. In general, and I want to say this, the Catholic Church teaches, and Christianity in general teaches, that sexuality is good, that sexuality mirrors God's love for creation, or the love of Christ for the church. Historically, Christians have sometimes been very prudish or treated sex as a necessary evil, but fundamentally Catholic teaching sees sexuality as good. And the poems in the Song of Songs, where the bridegroom, God, is in love with his bride, the world is mirrored by human sexual love. Okay, sex, by its nature, does two things. And I ask students to blurt out answers. And usually somebody blurts out, it makes babies. Yes, sex makes babies. What else does it do? And somebody says, oh, it's fun. I said, well, is it always fun? Is sex always fun? Well, it's not fun if this, or it's not fun if this. I said, well, what kinds of things need to be in place for sex to be pleasurable, needs for it to be enjoyable? And after some discussion, we come up with these two words, that sex by its nature creates life. It is procreative. It brings life into the world. That's what sex does. And sex with humans is also unitive, that it is pleasurable when it is part of a committed relationship. If a couple's having sex and one is pretty worried that the other one's going to dump them, it's not quite so pleasurable. Obviously, with rape, it's not, physically there's a release, but it's not pleasurable for the person being raped, and really even for the person who is committing the rape. Studies have shown that people who commit rape, it's about power and it's about control, and it's not about longing for some sort of feeling. So Catholic teaching is that sex needs to be true to its two natures in order for it to be okay. And if you deny one of them, if you're having sex just to have a baby, but you don't really care about the person, then you're going against the nature of what sex is. Or it's part of a committed relationship, but it's not open to the transmission of life, then it is going against Catholic teaching. So I would go back then to the slide about the birth control methods, that methods that make use of the natural cycle, methods that where the couple regulates their sexual relationship to in order not to have a child, that's working with the natural law. So the Catholic Church is okay with that. But things that interfere with it, so a barrier method like a condom or a diaphragm is an artificial barrier that is going against the nature of sex's procreative nature. Taking chemicals that fool your body into thinking it's pregnant so that you won't have a child is going against the natural law. Direct sterilization is going against the natural law. And again, the difference between that and indirect sterilization. Abortifacient Catholic teaching would say is wrong because it is the taking of a human life. It's not that you're just trying to avoid having a child because it's expensive and it's a hassle and everything else, but it is the taking of a human life. I would add that natural family planning kind of assumes that there's a commitment in the relationship. None of these methods are perfect. They all have different failure rates. And natural family planning is one that requires that partners communicate about the woman's cycle and the timing of things. It can be very, very challenging to regulate a relationship, and some couples, if the husband travels on business or the wife is out of state on a regular basis, that can be very challenging. But the Catholic Church says you're not supposed to have more children than you can support. But this is the only category of contraception or family planning the Catholic Church approves of. I'm going to pause this right here. I didn't get nearly through everything I wanted, but I'll post this online, and I'll get some more slides up for you.